Hi folks, welcome back, thank you for watching. Please do hit subscribe if you haven't done so yet. It really does help when you do that. I've just got back from 2 really long days in London, and yesterday it was 38 degrees, which for some parts of the world is completely normal. In England, 38 degrees is like the fiery depths of hell. So if I seem a bit wore out and subdued today, I'm sorry, but the heat did take it out of me somewhat. Now, last week I posted a video comparing the 4 Celestion AlNiCo speakers, kind of a revised edition of an old video I did comparing the blue, the gold and the cream, but I now have my hands on the new 35-watt Celestion AlNiCo Ruby, so I wanted to include this in the comparison, and a lot of you commented underneath that video and also over on the gear page, asking about the Ruby in particular, but also commenting on the video. So I tried to reply to all your comments and questions in person on those various comment sections, but I wanted to make this video kind of collating it all into one place because I think it is quite useful, the observations you guys have had, and I want to sort of add my own take on that. Not sure why I'm sat here stroking it like a Bond villain stroking a cat, so I'll put that over there. And I've got your questions on a piece of paper here, so I'll just rattle through them quickly. Pedro Almeida asks, did you record the Ruby a long time after the others? Is there a possibility the mic positions aren't exactly the same between them? And on the same line, Daniel Smith says, if you weren't so thorough with the multiple mics, phase, etc., I'd say you'd made a mistake, like being too far off centre on the Ruby, but it might just be that much darker. Well, it is that much darker, I'll talk about that in a minute. But when it came to the mics, what you guys wouldn't have known is the video you saw was actually take 2 of the whole thing. I'd shot all the footage and edited the audio for it a week beforehand, and then my Mac died, completely kaput. I lost all my footage, I had to completely wipe it and completely remake the video. And in the first version of the video, the finding of the Ruby being a bit darker than the others was exactly the same. So that is just how the speaker is. But when it came to mics, no, the mics were completely static on stands. And when I was swapping a speaker, I'd move the amp back, roll it out, swap the speaker, roll it back in, and I had reference points on each of the 3 mics to make sure they hadn't moved. I also shot the speakers in power order, so blue, ruby, gold, cream. So if the mics had been knocked for the Ruby, then the gold and the cream would have sounded weird too, which they didn't. So yeah, the 3 close mics were in perfect phase, and you know, I look at the waveforms on Pro Tools and move the mics so that they are, like, you know, absolutely lined up to the sample, like moving the mics a millimetre at a time. So the 3 close mics are perfectly in phase. The room mic is never perfectly in phase because of all the reflections and it's not stuck in a speaker, but you know, it's relatively in phase to the 3 close mics. So no, they were all shot on the same day, you know, within, you know, 2 hours of each other, and yeah, the mics didn't move. So that is just how the Ruby is. Merrithew asks, is the Ruby broken in yet on this demo? And a lot of you mentioned about the Ruby maybe not being broken in. As I said, it had done the demo video a week beforehand, so it had, you know, an hour and a half of playing then, and I'd also left it in the Dr. Z for that week, so it had probably 7 or 8 hours of being played at a good volume by the time it made the actual demo video that you guys heard. So it wasn't fully broken in because I think that takes about 15 hours, but it wasn't fresh out the shrink wrap either. But I think what a lot of you guys were meaning is the Ruby sounded a bit dark and subdued compared to the other 3. Now, breaking in a speaker makes it a little bit more dynamic in the low end. So if you were meaning it did sound a little bit, you know, not exciting compared to the others, then yeah, maybe breaking it in a little bit more may have helped with that a little bit. But I think you were mostly meaning the highs were quite dull compared to the other 3. Breaking in a speaker actually mellows the high end out. In theory, the brightest a speaker will ever sound is when it's fresh out the box. So yeah, that is just how that speaker is. It is darker in the high end. If you go onto the Celestion website, you'll see that the marketing for the Ruby is that it's mellow and warm. Whereas if you look at something like the gold, it's, you know, chime and brightness in the high end. So that is how the speaker's meant to be. And also Celestion give you the frequency responses for all the speakers. So if you look at, say, the Ruby and the golds, just because they're closest in power rating, what I did is I overlaid those 2 frequency responses in Photoshop. In what you're looking at now, the Ruby is red and the gold is blue, just because gold didn't show up on the graph. And you'll see that there's a little bit more thump sort of low down in the Ruby, nothing major. The sort of lower mids to mid-mids are pretty much exactly the same, but there is a massive difference in the high end. Now when you get up to sort of 10, 20k, that's irrelevant for a guitar speaker really, because they only kick out 7k maximum, give or take. But at sort of 3, 4, 5k, that's definitely something you will hear. And if you look at the difference between the Gold and the Ruby on that graph, the Ruby is 10 dB plus of SPL quieter at those frequencies. That is just how that speaker is. But as I'll talk about in a minute, it completely depends on context as to whether that's a good or a bad thing for you. Now, Bluesful says, just me, or does the Ruby sound better here when there's a modulation effect in play? What doesn't sound better when there's a modulation effect in play? Not Joe Average, great name. First, thanks for doing this. Have you thought of trying them together in a 2x12 to see which pair up better together? Now, I've only got 1x12 combo amps here, but I do run 3 amps at the same time. So I haven't tried pairing the speakers in the same cabinet as such, but I have tried pairing them in different amplifiers running at the same time. And for me, personally, and as I always say, it's completely personal preference this. Running 3 amps at the same time, I am never left wanting for low end because you get that sort of bass coupling thing going on. So I'm always trying to get rid of low end, if anything. But I am, being more of a sort of clean low gain player, always trying to find more definition in the high end. I like sort of the fidelity in a guitar sound. I don't like the highs being rolled off too much. So no, I haven't tried the speakers in a 2x12, but personally running the Ruby in the Dr. Z and then the Gold in my sort of Marshall Hughes and Kettner Pure Tone, yeah, they paired together really nicely. And because you get the sort of the thump of the Ruby and the definition of the Gold, and they just sort of match up and do slightly different things. So pairing speakers can be a really cool thing to do, but no, I haven't tried it myself in a cabinet, but running 3 amps together. Personally, I preferred having the Cream in the Dr. Z in the context of my rig rather than the Ruby, just because I like high-end and definition, which the Ruby kind of has less of compared to the Cream. But that's just my personal preference in my amp rig, with my style of playing, with the tones I like, etc, etc. Completely depends on you. Hoggy. Your demo video is very well done, but it leaves me scratching my head. I have extensive experience with all 4 speakers and I currently like the Ruby best in real life. In your video, it was my least favourite by far. An Echoplexy, amazing name, replied, could be the way the speakers match up with his particular amp. And to the same end, Irreversal says, the last speaker I would choose to pair with that amp is the Ruby. And this is kind of the key point I want to make in this video, referring to the last video. The Dr. Z DB4 is not a bright amp. For me, when you've got the tone knob, which is the kind of low end control, turned down to 1, it's fairly balanced. It's not hugely low endy, it's not hugely bright, it's not hugely bitey in the mid range. It's fairly well balanced. So what we found in the video is the Blue, the Gold and the Cream sounded much brighter than the Ruby. The Ruby, I think, didn't sound great in the Dr. Z. But it's a tricky thing of making this sort of video when one speaker is much darker than the others, because if I put it in an amp that was really bright and EQ'd it so that the Ruby sounded amazing, the other 3 would have sounded really bright and shrill. So it's all a balancing act. So I completely agree, the Dr. Z DB4 is not the right amp for the Ruby. But as Analog Audio Rules says, I could see the Ruby being great with a heavy distorted lead tone, possibly a rhythm speaker too, but not for true cleans. And I completely agree. As I said, I'm more of a sort of clean low gain player and I like the high end. If you're playing sort of heavy distorted riffs, you're not going to want that fizzy high end sort of making the sound like a tin of bees. You're going to want to get rid of that either by EQing the amp or the pedal or whatever. If you've ever set up an overdrive pedal, you'll know that the more gain you put on, generally the more treble you take out, because the brighter the sound is with the gain, it tends to sound really harsh and nasty. So the Ruby is great for the heavy tones. In the demo with the Williams Audio Ram Fuzz, I deliberately set that quite bright, so that with the other 3 speakers, it was quite abrasive, but the Ruby just rolled it off really nicely. And the marketing bump that Celestion have put out for it, I think really is true when they say it's mellow and warm. With more distorted tones, the Ruby put me in mind of someone like Brian May, that kind of high-end rolled off sort of middly honky sound, which is really, really cool if that is what you're after. If you're using lots of gain and you want that kind of dark middly honky sound, the Ruby's amazing. You won't want the other three compared to the Ruby for that. So, as I said at the end of the main video, it completely depends on what guitar you're using, what amp you're using, what style of music you're playing, your personal preferences for tone, all of that stuff as to whether the Ruby works for you or doesn't work for you in the context of your rig. And finally, Bulbasaur 85, which had the most punchy feel / immediate attack. I think in terms of feel, they were fairly similar, I would say. But that said, the EQ differences give the perception of the blue and the gold being quite quick and snappy on the attack, then the cream, and then probably the Ruby because it's much softer sounding. So I don't think it's necessarily the actual attack. It's more of a sort of psychoacoustic effect of, having a bright, plinky sound compared to a sort of more muffled, rolled off one. So yeah, I mean, it comes down to EQ more than anything else, I think. But yeah, I would say probably the blue and then the gold had the most sort of snappy attack. Possibly, arguably, the more similar sounding to a ceramic speaker, just because they were very quick compared to the Ruby. So there we are, folks. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope that kind of cleared up a few things that you guys have been thinking and asking about in terms of the Ruby. Please do carry on writing in with any more questions you might have. I'll do my best to answer them for you. Thank you for watching, guys. I hope it was an interesting video today. Please do carry on subscribing to this channel. It really does help. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.